Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have this panel for you. The timing of this is a fairly fortuitous time. As you've probably known, the news has been filled with a variety of hate crimes that have been propagated against Asian Americans. It's certainly nothing new in the broader scheme of things, but in the sense of concentration, it's made a lot of noise. And so we didn't plan it that way. We wouldn't plan it that way. We wouldn't want that to happen. But we hope that this can be a time of just learning and listening. And one of the virtues I like to equip students with in class is the ability to not just listen and hear, but that hearing might have a deep sense of penetrating into the deepest parts of our hearts so that we learn something. And that in learning something, just maybe it gives us a new way to think about life moving forward. You could think of it as real life improvisation. So I'm delighted to have this group here with us. As you'll see pretty quickly, we are a fairly diverse group. So even as we're here in the midst of Asian Heritage Month, or at least Moody Edition Asian Heritage Month, you'll notice that Asia is a pretty big continent. It's the biggest continent as we divide land masses. And so you're not terribly surprised, hopefully, to see that we don't all look the same, we don't sound the same. Our experiences, while at times might overlap, at other times won't overlap. So I think you'll hear that honesty and hopefully you'll be blessed by this dialogue. So as you think about Asian Heritage Month, maybe include a little, in parentheses, Asian peoples in the plural. So I'll turn it over now to my panelists here that I'm thrilled to be able to be alongside, and we'll start on the far end with Nancy. There's no meaning behind her being the furthest away from me. Don't take anything by that. And so she can introduce herself, say a little bit about herself, and then work our way around.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Nancy, and I come from Nepal, and I'm in the human services and pre-counseling major, and I am in my second semester junior at the moment.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joshua, and I'm from India. I'm a sophomore doing my pastoral ministry right now. So, yeah, that's me.
I'm Jonas Swenson. I am a junior communications major, and my cultural context is that I am biracial, and I have two nationalities. I am half Japanese, half American. My mom is Japanese, and my dad is American, but I spent about 10 years here in America and about 8 years in Japan.
Yeah, my name is Yanan. I'm from the Philippines, moved here when I was 16. I'm currently a junior at Moody, theology major. I'm really excited to be here.
Great, and I'm Dr. Varma, though even in saying it that way, that's already an anglicized pronunciation, right? So it would be Varma. Joshua, what part of India are you from?
I'm from the South.
He's from the South, and you'll probably notice that there are differences already because I'm from the North.
Yeah.
I was born and raised here in the States, but at the same time, most of my family is in Delhi in the North, or Delhi as we would say.
Delhi.
And so just different languages,
Yeah.
different food. Ours is better, sorry.
Well, I'm not going to give up on that.
Fair enough. So I have a first question for you guys. I'm going to direct this one. I believe Jonah wanted to go first, right? So he didn't want to go first in that he wanted to be first, but he has something to say here. So my question is, what were some challenges that you have seen yourself and the Asian community face in the past few years?
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of, just online and in the news, just a lot of sentiment and just a lot of vocabulary that's been targeted towards specifically Asian demographics, especially in regards to COVID. We've heard words being circulated around like Kung Flu and China virus to directly target Chinese Americans. And we've seen I can't remember the number exactly, but over a 200% increase in attacks against Asian Americans who are specifically of Far Eastern descent. So it could be Japanese, Korean, or Chinese, or Taiwanese. But those particular people of those descent have experienced a really strong increase in attacks, whether physically or verbally. They've increased in the news like crazy. And so, yeah, there's a lot of Chinese people who fear for their parents being attacked or for their children being attacked. And there's been many violent cases around the country. And this has been due to a lot of racist sentiment towards against Asian people because of just how, society's worries have been exacerbated by the COVID virus.
Yeah, does anyone else want to jump in on that? Feel free to.
Yeah. Yeah, just kind of to add on to what Jonah's saying, I mean, there was a report that came out recently that over the past year, there have been nearly 3,800 hate crimes directed to, or just kind of done against Asians in the States. And so that says something about what's going on culturally and socially. And it really shows that there's something problematic about how we've been approaching, I guess, just kind of our attitude towards the pandemic, and how that has been shaping our view of Asians in America. And I mean, just recently, actually today, this morning, March 30th, is it March 30th? I think it is.
31st.
March 31st. Yeah, so this morning I woke up and first thing I saw on the news was really a video of a man in New York beating up a 65-year-old Filipino woman and telling her to leave the country, you don't belong here. And so that's something that has really hurt my heart. And even just like a few weeks ago with what happened in Atlanta where 6 Asian women were killed. And I mean, I've received a lot of support and I'm thankful for that. But we also should see that there are a lot of Asians in America who feel alone and kind of in solitude and don't have that kind of support system that we might have here at Moody. And so I guess those are some challenges that people are facing, because not just because of the virus, but because there really hasn't been much talk about what it means to be Asian or Asian American or something like that. And it's only happening now, so yeah.
Yeah, I think with that, it's worth noting what we don't have on this panel. We have no one representing the Middle East, which is part of that larger landmass of Asia, right? And I think about my college days. I was in college when 9/11 happened, and I was at a state university, and we might think, well, it's easy to tell that they're different, right? They're clearly not Asian because they look or they sound different or they dress differently. You might be surprised to know that their food isn't actually all that different from northern Indian food, right? Insofar as they're both very warm climates, more deserty regions. But I think back to even when I was in college when 9/11 happened, how some of my friends, for some reason it didn't happen to me, maybe because I'm relatively an introvert and I didn't really know anybody, but some of my friends were on a bus, on the campus bus, and they were just being yelled at to go home. And one of them, who was probably a little too much of a smart aleck, would say things like, "You mean to Clinton, Iowa?" So maybe not the time to joke, but this isn't a new reality by any stretch of the imagination, and it extends to all those sorts of markers that we think of. Well, obviously we can tell the difference. There's that element of as if every Middle Eastern person did 9/11, but then there's the element of apparently you couldn't tell the difference between a South Indian man and a Middle Eastern person, right? So I appreciate these comments. I think they're really helpful. I think the next question really flows out of what you guys were saying. So I'll ask this to anyone in general who wants to take this one. In the midst of these challenges, what were some ways that you've seen the Asian church, or maybe broadly the Asian community, if you didn't grow up in the church, unite to overcome them? This could even be recently, right? Because some of these are recent issues.
Well, yeah, I'd like to take that. So I go to a church that is essentially Indian American. So there are a lot of Indians who stay here, who visit the church. There we not only entertain Christians, but a lot of Indians come there because it's the community that supports them, that gives them emotional support. Because a lot of people go through racial injustice, and people really sometimes hurt people with their words. They say like, "You came from India to steal our jobs." Well, that's not the real reason why we came here. That we don't come here to steal opportunities, but we come here to fulfill needs that are there in the economy. And so there have been so many people that come and express their feelings with pastors, saying that we're being treated unfairly at jobs. And it's the pastors who really, the community that helps them, that stands with them. And some people lose their jobs sometimes. And the church stands in the gap and really supports them by, financially providing for them and just extending a hand of help with whatever they can do. So I've really seen our church do a lot for the Asian American community. Yeah.
I can go next. Just with like personal experience, and I think when with all of this happening at the moment, people kind of normally targets people from like Southeast Asia, and sometimes kind of like people like Joshua and me and Dr. Varma probably are kind of in the safe zone. But even just talking about like from my culture, we are 4 of us here in Moody from Nepal, and each of us looks so different. One of my friends looks more like Southeast Asian, and during all of this time that so much hatred is being poured out to Asians, we had to kind of take care of our friend, you know, while she lives off campus and kind of like extending the hand. Anytime if you need any help, we're willing to walk alongside you. We're willing to drop you off if it's needed. If you really feel uncomfortable, then we are there to help you. So I think our culture, where we come from, is very community-based, and we want to offer the hospitality and serve. And so, like, I think sometimes because of that, we as an Asian community have come together to help each other out more than ever before. Sometimes I think we have this mentality of, okay, well, if they don't ask, I shouldn't. I should just keep my boundary. But I think as a follower of Christ, taking that one step and saying, even though when they're not open to asking, saying, how can I help you at this time? Are you okay? Things like that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to add a comment as well. I think it's important to note that Asians compose about half of the population of the world in America. Yet when you see how the Asian American community in America has reacted to a lot of these racist attacks, is just so much unity and commonality. And even I myself have experienced so much just commonality and solidarity with my other Asian American brothers and sisters here. And it's like you look at the countries and the languages and the cultures within Asia, it's immensely diverse. It's thousands and thousands of languages and ethnic groups. But you can see just the beauty of the solidarity that we've been able to experience and I've been able to experience here. Not just that commonality, it's like our cultural backgrounds are so different. And each of our own countries have different sentiments towards each other. Like, for example, Japanese people can often look down on other cultures and often have a lot of ethnocentric views towards other nationalities in East Asia. But I've just seen so much beauty here in the Asian American community here in terms of being able to bond over us being minorities and having our Asian American heritage being our commonality. And I've seen so much beauty in terms of like the diversity of the body of Christ coming together despite our differences as one.
Yeah, and even to just quickly comment on that as well, I think it's been really beautiful to see how Asian American homes are being opened up to just kind of for that unity to be cultivated and for that to flourish. I think, I mean, I'm speaking specifically from a Filipino perspective, and Filipinos have a huge emphasis on the home. That the home, what's central to the home especially is not the TV or the living room, but the meal, where the dining room where we eat and where community is created through food and sharing food. And especially over the past year, it's been really beautiful to see me be invited specifically to homes like that. And when I visit Filipino homes, it's not just, the people there are not just all Filipinos, but Filipino homes are also being opened up to Asians of other cultures and nationalities, to other Asian peoples. It's been really beautiful to see how God has been using specifically Asian homes for that purpose of creating and fostering community. And it does say something as well, I think, about kind of the place of the home in the church and how crucial the home is and the family is in building up the church and edifying each other. And so, yeah, I think that's been a really beautiful way to see God work through this unity and create community out of that.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little off script and just ask a follow-up to that of, do you think, because I think in my own experience and the experience that you all are discussing here, there's a larger communal aspect, right? The locus of personhood and identity is found within the larger framework of the family. And even down to the little things of the meal is really important. And even how one eats the meal, right? Jan and I have talked about before, a professor that I had years ago is a Filipino man who he would describe the Filipino, the true traditional way of eating a meal with your hands. And I said, well, that's how it is in Indian culture, right? And Nepalese culture, right? And is it the same with Japanese? Oh, I guess the chopsticks, perhaps. Yeah, but the idea of eating with the hands is that you're deeply, intimately in that food, right? And I have traumatic arthritis, so it's hard for me now. But there's something beautiful about that, right? Where you mix it with your hands, and you're doing so even traditionally sitting on the ground. It's not even a table. Do you think those sorts of communal elements of eating together and taking it as more than just a nutrition, but a family time, does that create a larger atmosphere within which there can be this kind of rallying, even when you have, as Jonah mentioned, some antagonisms historically as well? What do you think?
Yeah, I would like to talk about that. When I came into Moody, I was so scared because this was my first international experience, and it was the first time in life that I'm seeing all white people around me, and I was almost going to cry the first day that I came here. But then once we started school and we had this place called International Table in the SDR, wow, big shout out to that. Really missed that place. We used to, where all international students sat together, we had meals together. That was one thing that really made me comfortable at Moody and didn't want me to think about going back home. Because I've lived with my parents for 23 years of my life before I came to Moody. So it was really hard for me to cope with the culture, with missing home. But, staying with the international students and eating with them at the SDR international table was so much fun. I used to eat with my hands, and nobody even bothered. They used to feel so comfortable with it. And wow, that was the wonderful time. I'm sure all of us can relate to it because I've seen Jan and Jonah and Nancy, all of us sit together and eat. It's such a wonderful time. I think it definitely plays a big role because we are brought up in that way. We are brought up with a community-based mindset and a very family-oriented life. So we really need that, community always to be supported and just to go along with life. Yeah.
Can I add to that? Actually, you do bring up a good point. Like food, at least also in my perspective, but I think we all share this somehow. The fact that food or meals, it's not just like something that we do to sustain ourselves, which I think is, and it's not just about sustaining ourselves or nourishing ourselves. It's deeply tied and connected to our context and to our lands. Like for example, North Indian and South Indian and South Indian food is very different. Same in the Philippines. Like I grew up in the South because my parents did church planting there, but we are originally from the North, and we'd always travel at least once a year to visit family in Manila in the North. And it's always like, for me growing up, it's always been a curiosity for me, like the reality that, wow, food is served differently in these two very different contexts. However, in the same way, food still plays a very central role to how community is built. And it says something, again, about how diversity is in the Asian church. It's not just one monolithic, like Asian culture is like this. No, even within the larger cultures, there are always subcultures within that that are so deeply tied to the context and the lands that they are in. It's like, yeah, and it's beautiful to see when, despite those differences, people still come together. And I think in many ways, it's through food and through eating together. So, yeah.
And that's a wonderful transition to the next question. So going off script worked. So I'll direct this one to Nancy first. So we talk about this diversity to even Asianness, right? It's not one Asian. And even though there's often a stereotype that you can probably imagine right now what that might be. As you think about the church, how does some of that differentness come about within the church? What is some of that diversity within Asian churches?
I think I will speak mostly from my context back home because I haven't really been to a ton of Asian churches here. So my parents run a people with disabilities ministry back home. And a lot of them, they come from different parts of Nepal, from Himalayan areas to very plain areas, right? And people from mountains are more used to eating warm food, wearing warm clothes. They look different, and they come to my home. And and then there's people from plain areas where they're more used to eating, I guess, not hot food, but it's just different ways of living, and people look more different. And even in my home, there's so much diversity. So we all live together, and it's about 25 people that I grew up with. And just seeing everybody so different. And we have people with disability, and just the diversity of church. I think I'm so thankful to God that I got to grow up in that place where, I don't know if I'm going a little bit off topic here, but even like my dad teaching us, whether you're a man or a woman, you still got to lead the church. You kind of like lead as in like, he gave us the opportunity to lead. So even if you're disabled or if you're able, you can go front and lead the church. And I remember even when I'm able, I was really afraid, but my dad pushed us to do that. And it just when I traveled to different places and saw different churches, I just learned to appreciate more where I came from, because I saw my brothers and sisters who were not able, leading worship, playing instrument, sharing message, encouraging words to us, praying for us. So I saw them in different position doing that. So if coming from such a small country like Nepal, there's so much diversity. Here, we're from, like everybody has explained, we're so big, Asia is big, and we all look so different. And the diversity of church even here is so different among them. That's just, I don't know where I was really going with that, but when I think of diversity, I think that's the first thing that comes from the place I grew up.
Yeah, so I'd like to add. So in India, I was an evangelist, and I used to travel around the country. I've been to many states and just to preach the gospel, and God opened a lot of opportunities for me. I'm so thankful for that experience. One thing that I learned from my travel experience is every state, every town, every city that I went to, and every church that I went to preach was different. So in some churches, I'll give a very simple example. Some churches wouldn't allow the preacher to wear his shoes on stage. Well, some churches are okay with that. And in some churches, people sit down. In some churches, people sit on chairs. So there's a lot of small differences that, you can make out through the way they worship. In some churches, they clap hands and they sing loudly and they have loud instruments. But in some churches, they're very quiet. They just stand, they sing, they sit down. But we believe that God's present. And that's how diverse the church in India is. I've always encountered something very new in every church that I stepped into. And that's one reason I'd like to say to people who want to go to missions, be open to new things. Because if you're going to go with a rigid mindset that if you want to serve in the Asian community, like India or any other country in the Asian continent, if you're going to think that, this is how it is, this is how I'm going to be, and just fixing your mind on something, then you'll have to break a lot of bridges when you go. And that's going to be hard on you. So I just a small word of, encouragement is be open to every church's culture, which I believe is also the same thing in the United States. I think every church has a different thing. They do differently. I've been to many churches. They have their services in a different way. So I believe that applies to the Asian culture as well and the church. Yeah.
I think what I did wanted to clarify is that when we talk about diversity in churches, you might think, well, it's in here in America too. There's so many different cultures because America is so big, or United States is so big. But also thinking, when we specifically talk about Asia, Asia is this huge continent with so many different countries. And these different countries of people coming, for example, here you will find different people from different Asian countries coming together. So that's if has been a war there, that's different story with that culture. If there's been, I don't know, famine in that specific country, that's taking different story and coming here. So it's taking I don't know, the diversity is like completely different when you're coming from this one country in one church, whereas when you're in the same country, diversity maybe looks a little bit different, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, even seeing that as well in the Filipino church in the States. So I mean, I'm glad over the past year I got connected to Filipino churches. And that's always been just kind of an encouragement to me, is to see, like I said earlier, how diversity is honored and respected in the Asian American church, just because there's very few of us here. And, when we're pulled out of our contexts and brought here to the States, for all sorts of different reasons, I came here to study. And, we need to come together and band together. And I mean, even just seeing how over the past year, like a lot of Filipinos are in the States work as nurses and frontliners. I mean, if you go to a hospital, you'll probably find at least one Filipino nurse there. And a lot of these people have been isolated and have been kind of like, have been in quarantine just because they're always exposed to the virus. And even my own family members and friends have had that experience. But it's been certainly an encouraging thing to see what you guys are talking about, like how, because there's so few of us, we just kind of come together and are like, hey, let's be there for each other. Let's hold arms, and we're in this together, that kind of thing. And we've seen that also over the past few weeks with all the other things that have been going on the news. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've also noticed when I grew up in Japan and when I was there in Japan, I went to various different types of churches, whether it's Japanese. My family was working with a church that was planted by Koreans for Japanese people, and I had Filipino friends as well. And I remember, Japanese church is very much kind of like your country, Baptist church, in terms of people are very reserved, and that's just really the cultural expression of the Japanese people in public, is to be very reserved and to be more about the mind and talking about and discussing ideas in that sense. But then, we go to this other Korean church that was planted by Koreans, and their style of worship is much more expressive. So even between Japan and Korea, there's very different expressions and ways of expressing themselves that they do. So they're much more charismatic in the way they worship, and so it was interesting to see that balance. Or even at a meal, Japanese people are not usually used to having spicy food, but then they would bring out the option to have gochujang, which is this Korean spice sauce that you could put on your food, and that was just an option for people who wanted to put it on or not, even for foods that were normally more spicy for Korean people. And I remember my friend, who is Filipino, telling us about how his church would start at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, because that's just how Filipino like to do it. They're more laid back, and they like to do it in the afternoon, sleep in on Sundays. And Japanese culture isn't as much like that, but it was just so interesting to see the diversity of churches and the ways that people worship, even within just Korean and Japanese and Filipino culture. People may think Korean and Japan are so similar, pretty much the same country, but there's so many differences even between within that. And that's important to understand, that every cultural context has different modes of expression, and that the way you come from and the way you worshipped as a child, where you grew up, is just one way that people express themselves.
Yeah, I'd want to throw into this as well, even the ways in which we envision the Christian calendar, right, can have diverse expressions, where I think about the incarnation, the beautiful moment that we think of with Christmas, celebrated for the most part around the world on December 25th. But you also think about, what is December 25th? Well, it's a moment on the Latin calendar. It was the festival of Saturnalia, right, where the early Christians in the Greek world and the Latin world together looked at this and they said, there's something here. There's something that we can draw upon, this notion of gift giving. And because the ultimate gift we're talking about here is the Father's gift of the Son. And I think about what we do in our own house, which is moving a little bit beyond church, but still, insofar as the family is, I think, an extension of the life of the church in that sense. For us, it's important to talk about the incarnation not just as tied to the Latin festival of Saturnalia, but in an Indian household to Diwali, where Diwali is the festival of light. And the entire Gospel of John is filled with these great declarations of the light that shone in darkness. And that light is tied directly in John 1 to the incarnation of Jesus. And so it's a beautiful thing, I think, to be able to say. We follow that up with some mithai, which is just these Indian sweets. And we say, okay, here, kids, now you can have your unbridled sweets the one time in your life, right? So I think that the possibility of diverse expression also helps us situate ourselves as not universal entities, but particular people and places learning to worship where we are, right? And that's where we become more akin to what we see in the end of Revelation of every tribe and tongue together, praising the name of God, right? Where tribes and tongues belong together. We could go on and on, but we're close to here to the end of our time. I wanted to ask one more question. I'm going to direct this one to anyone who wants to answer. So have at it, whoever does. I'm going to say, how is it that people outside the Asian community can best be of help to people within the Asian community, whether it be here at Moody or outside of Moody?
Sorry.
You can go.
Okay, I can go first then. When I think about that, I remember when I first came to Moody, and just remembering the people who have been from the first day until now, and those were people that we started conversation with, just like talking about Nepal and just their heart for missions. But then this slowly started to go beyond that, going, Nancy, who you really are. I want to know you. I want to know your culture, but I also want to know you as a person. And I think just building that relationship, not just like being interested from where you're at, or like, oh, I want to eat the food that you guys eat, but we are a person. Like, I guess everybody deserves to be known by who they are. So trying to learn that, making commitment to do so. And since we're such a community kind of people, right, trying to join in that community, whether it be an international table, I don't know how that's going to happen this semester, but maybe next semester, things like that, and just like stepping into their shoes, going with them. And this is, I think, a principle wherever you go and do missions, stepping into their culture with them, not trying to do on your own. That's what I can say.
Yeah, talking about Asian people, one thing that you can, really see in most Asian people is that they're very friendly. You can even talk to a stranger, and we'll be open to that. We'll be open to say hi. But what other people can do, out of my experience, when I came here to Moody, I felt so, kind of alone, and until I found the international group, some American friends, no offense to them, they really wanted to know about my culture, but they didn't want to be friends with me. Like, they would talk to me until they know all about India, any information that I could give about India, and then they would say bye. So there's very little about me, and just too much to know about my culture and my food and what we do and how it is. So we'd really appreciate true friendship, than just being used to get some geographical information out of us. We'd really appreciate if people would like to be true friends with us, be a part of us and join us to share our joys and sorrows, and not just the culture, be a part of the person that you're talking to. So that would be really appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think it's an appropriate note to end on, to just be reminded of what we should already know, and we in some way already know that we're people. And at the end of the day, for our differences, we do have that commonality, and it's that desire for joining and belonging. So at its most basic sense, right, this can be true of not just us, but anyone, right? And hopefully that can be something we can carry forward and be lights to the world precisely for that reason, right? Because we think about Jesus as the one who joins us, and he joined people that didn't belong together. Pharisees and Sadducees didn't like each other very much, and they're joined together in his presence. But then you throw in the lepers, and you throw in the tax collectors, and the fishermen, and you throw in Gentiles, right, and Samaritans. These are people who didn't belong together, but they were people. And in the presence of Christ, Christ didn't destroy their particularity, but rather saw a new way of organizing it. And that's a beautiful thing. Well, we're out of time. We're glad you joined us, and of course, we live amongst you, or at least they live amongst you. I work amongst you, but we're always happy to talk more. So reach out to anyone or another friend, and we can continue the conversation informally. Until then, we hope you have a blessed day.